Our guest tonight is the man who originated Superman. He has written all of Superman's exploits since this idol of millions made his first public appearance. He's Mr. Jerry Siegel. Good evening, Mr. Siegel.
Good evening, Fred.
So you are the man behind Superman, Mr. Siegel.
No, I'm just one of the men, Fred. I write the situations and the dialogue, and the strip is drawn by my collaborator, Joe Shuster.
Hey everybody, this is Petey from the Spinner Rack, and today I want to do a video on the creation of Superman, right? And you're saying, we've done that. We've done tons of videos on that. We have our official Superman guy who's done many videos, which I say go out there and watch them. But there's another aspect of this creators' rights, this sort of thing that people talk about, especially now with Winter Soldier and what's the other character, America Chavez, and a late, a 2000 thing where, you have a derivative character that's connected to an original character, which doesn't lend you to getting any money usually. And then you have America Chavez, which is a creation, but at the same time, Marvel wasn't handing out 4% deals anymore. They were owning the creations at that period, right? So ultimately, I want to also talk about, which is the major thing, which you see in the title, is that Jerry Siegel cursed the Superman movie. Now, this would be a I am not Spock moment for many fans, right? And for many historians. Right, because if you think of I am not Spock, he was kind of had this. Leonard Nimoy had this kind of hate period between him and the Paramount people, the people who owned Star Trek, that were using his likeness. They were, putting him out as the bad guy. That he was a truculent one, this, that, and the other. When he, they were very tough on him as an actor, basically saying they would fire him over anything, right? So ultimately, in the end of Star Trek, and it being following him along, and him fighting with Paramount, he wrote, "I am not Spock." And fans, he was the bad Star Trek actor up until William Shatner did the Saturday Night Live skit, Get a Life, and then the fans, and then his peers kind of turned on William Shatner. William Shatner is the bad one, right? So you can see all those years where it went from one person being bad to the other one being, and people kind of jumping ship to that, right? So we have these books. I pointed out this one here, this one here, because we just did Mort Wessinger. And in this thing here, it mostly talks about Mort Wessinger, right? It's like basically this Krypton Companion is basically about a love letter to Mort Wessinger and all of the things that happened under his time. And the same with this would have the slant. Like, even though this is a good book and it's kind of it's not as in depth, but at the same time there's a slant to say basically Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster created this character. Right, they created it on their own outside of national publications, right? And at the same time, a lot of other things with Superman came from, I think, the radio. Even though I think Mort Wessinger takes credit for Kryptonite and flying, when I think both of those came from the radio show, but a lot of other things were added, and there's some things that added by Edmund Hamilton. I think he did the Legion. I think Otto Binder created a lot of stuff, but a lot of stuff he was creating was kind of giving the Superman family similar to the Captain Marvel family, right? But there's this feeling that we have these two guys that lucked up on this character. DC took a chance, or National took a chance on them. It was a success, and it could have been a failure and forgotten like everything else, but National put their money behind it, and then they paid them to produce a comic book. And then at some point, when the Superboy thing happened and they felt their rights were, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster's rights were infringed upon, they sued, and that led them into fall from favor at DC. And ultimately, Jerry Siegel would come back to write Superman, and at some point he's going after, people look at it like he was gone from writing Superman because of falling from favor as a someone from the past. And then next thing you know, we hear him cursing out the Superman movie, right? So I guess we should deal with that first, right? I'm going to try to go through this thing here because I was surprised because I've done a couple Legion thing and I was going to do another one, but I'm waiting for this other book to come in about the Legion Outpost. So I'm not going to do that now, but it's coming, right? So I'm going to try to give you this passage because they have this nice article on Jerry Siegel, right? Oh, but look, before I go to that, that's going to have this. I said this is mostly about. I'm jumping around. I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to. It's hard to stay focused. Mostly about more Wessinger and everything that happened into the 70s and with Julie Schwartz, and then going into the end of the before crisis type of thing, right? So, but in this, they do have the original 4-page plot to the death of Superman, right? Now, even though it wasn't the same, they did do a death of Superman in the in the 90s. Now, if you remember with the Byrne run, a lot of old stories were redone in new fashions, and that would be kind of taking that springboard of doing the death in their own way and having the playing out the mourning period. There's also All-Star Superman, which takes the framework of this plot that, Luthor doesn't actually get rehabilitated, but he has this plan to kill Superman, right? But in All-Star Superman kind of knows it, so it's kind of his goodbye to Metropolis. Different from, whatever happened to Man of Tomorrow, that's a goodbye to the whole Silver Age, like those that were out there, right? So, but they do have this. So it's not a large thing about Jerry Siegel in this. They do have this plot, which is worth it. It's a very good book still. But all right, well, let's get to the heart of the matter, right? Because this is going to initially feed the fire of the bitterness, and why, like most people, the slant is that if he wasn't bitter, somehow DC would have played ball, helped him out on their own, but he kept kind of pushing them back and kept going to the press, saying all this stuff. And, there's some points, and this would prove that he did say that, but it would lead you to not really think of what's going on here, right? So because we're going to get back to this point here later, but let's see, I should use these guys, right? Joe's partially blind. My health is not good. We are both 61 years old. Most of our lives during Superman's great success has been spent in want. As far as Joe and I are concerned, we have been victimized by evil men and a selfish, evil company which callously ruined us and appeared to be willing to abandon us in our old age, though our creation Superman has made and continues to make millions for them. And then this is in the cover letter. It said, I, Jerry Siegel, the co-originator of Superman, put a curse on the Superman movie. I hope it super bombs. And I hope Superman fans stay away from it in droves. I hope the whole world become aware of the stench that surrounds Superman and will avoid the movie like the plague. Why am I putting a curse on this movie based on my creation of Superman? Because the cartoonist Joe Shuster and I, who co-originated Superman together, will not get 1 cent from the Superman super movie deal. The publishers of Superman comic book, national periodical publications, killed my days, murdered my nights, choked my happiness, strangled my career. I consider national executives economic murderers, money-mad monsters. If they and the executives of Warner Communications, which owns National, had consciences, you would right the wrongs inflicted on Joe and me. They curse on a Superman movie. So, with that said, seems pretty bad, huh? And let's add some fuel to the fire, right? But this, no, actually, in truth, because this is hard. This is a harder one to go through because there's also comments from John Byrne, who did Man of Steel, on talking about creators' rights, right? And his angle was something that I kind of agreed with at a point, because, hey, you signed this deal, if it changes, then what can you do? It's a hard thing. And you would hope, like the same way, like Oprah didn't have her own show, didn't own it, no pun intended. And at some point, because of her success, the company is willing to play ball, sell her the rights to her show, and she becomes this multimillionaire. I'm not sure if she's a billionaire, but she's raking in the dough, right? So we would hope it was like that, but the way business kind of works, if you're kind of putting out a bunch of ideas, you're failing as much as you're succeeding. So you're putting out a bunch of ideas, and at the same time, all of this stuff fails, but one is succeeding. The cost of doing business is that factor. But okay, not get into that yet. I'm still not ready to get into that yet, right? So we go to John Byrne. He did this thing called a guest spot talking about creators' rights, right? And I'm going to quickly go through it. Basically, he's talking about, he's happy that they're getting money for Superman, right? And DC becomes the villainous national conglomerate, and at times, at times, but at the same time, so he said, we basically get on the question of creator right and did they deserve a pension, right? So he said, on purely human level, were Siegel and Schuster entitled to the pensions? The answer is yes, of course. But on any other level, sorry. The answer is a big fat no. They may have been two little dumb hicks from the Midwest, unfamiliar with the machinations of the publishing industry of the late 1930s. They were also created a single character whom the rest of us have created an entire industry. But the fact remains that the character had been generally rejected. The Bell Syndicate said it had no lasting appeal. When the infant DC took the risk and brought the idea from Siegel Schuster, and don't be fooled by the paltry sum they were paid, generally reported something under $200. That was a lot of money in 1938, right? So talking about Byrne goes into talking about the creator's rights and wrongs and this, that, and the other. Sorry to say, in two books, at least, in this one here, and this one here, well, no, I'm going to go to where I figured some parts out. There's a interview of a parade where Superman is introduced into the parade, right? So you have that framework that people feel that with a little bit of money they got with the fate, basically all the risk was on National, and they lucked up on a company, and by luck they hit it big, and now not appreciating what National had done for them, which is not true, right? Naturally, National wasn't in a way of appreciative initially of what they did, right? Because once they realized there was a hit, right? Jerry Siegel came and asked for a raise, right? And when he asked for a raise, he got this from the company, right? From Jack Lewis. He said, frankly, when I got through reading your letter, it took my breath away. I did not anticipate that when you asked to come to New York to discuss this matter of newspaper syndication, that you would try to take advantage, you'd want to take advantage of this visit to boost your price on Superman. You grossly exaggerated the importance of Superman. Don't forget there are 64 pages in the magazine, and there isn't any magazine being published today that can sell on the basis of one feature. Whether it is Popeye, Mickey Mouse, or I thought for the moment that our magazine depended on your strip, I would certainly make every effort to avoid such situations, right? Only 30% have designated Superman as their favorite. The balance seems scattered amongst our other features in the magazine, so come off your high horse, right? They're talking about him having a swell head, all this other stuff. History has proven Jack Leibowitz wrong, right? That his importance was justified, right? So this terrible letter that they wrote back, pushing back, but at some point, as stated here in the article and in this book, they participated not just in a monthly salary. They participated with DC, with National on stuff like, the newspaper strip. And they were saying they're making up to, I guess it was like 30 grand a year in everything that they had going on for Superman, right? So it was more than, it was similar, it was a studio situation. They had a art studio that Joe Shuster ran in Cleveland. And at the same time, Siegel was the lead writer and did most of the writing. So they had this thing, and he also was the Mort Wessinger of the time. Even though he had Jack Leibowitz, he had to run things through Whitney Ellsworth, but at the same time, he was kind of the guy can be like DC was kind of distributing it, and he was kind of the face of Superman, right? So he would go. They had the parade. There's an audio interview, and he presents himself as the official from DC Comics at this parade, and he talks about his superiors. And he is the spokesperson. He's not negative. He is very much a gracious person. They ask him every same. If you look at Burns' interview with Katie Couric, is it Katie Couric? Where it's like, just a Jane, just a Paulie. But if you look at that 86 interview where they ask him all those dumb questions, they ask Siegel every dumb question. He answers every one of them. Doesn't give a bad response. He is the right spokesman for Superman, right? So everyone knows the initial start of the beef came from Superboy, right? And that's where the suit came from, right? But if we go into here, the thing, and they talk about it in this one too, is that Jerry Siegel, he had to go to the war. Same with Mort Wessinger, they had to go, and in this time, the studio that Joe Shuster had, DC kind of came in and moved it to their offices. So ultimately they took over the art, and also started pushing Joe Shuster out, right? But Joe Shuster, and if Jerry Siegel hadn't gone, he'd been able to protect their studio and basically be the guys producing the comic book itself. Like where DC would be the editors, like their editors in chief and their distributor, right? So it'd be something where they're producing a product and giving it to DC, similar to what the Batman, what Bob Kane was doing, right? So it stands a reason why they're participating with the success of Superman, right? So with Jerry Siegel out of the picture, they move they somehow finagle it to get Shuster's studio to DC, and then they start pushing Joe Shuster out because obviously they realize that he has a lot of ghosts, he had a lot of people helping out. But even what's the name? C.C. Beck had a studio for Captain Marvel because they had 2 books going on or something like that, and all the other books that were happening. So when you look at it like that, you have this thing where they do become the evil conglomerate that kind of starts to push them out, right? And so they had this idea Now, this book kind of points out that, Superboy in the original thing was different from what DC published, where it was just the same character as a boy, and Siegel wanted to have a, I guess even possibly, where Ditko described, Spider-Man, so as a teen, someone who could make mistakes, right? Where Superboy was the small version of Superman, right? Who was smart, upstanding. Times I guess they had some mistakes happen, but they say he was pointing this out as a major difference in this book, which is like, I mean, come on. The idea is the idea, right? So that would lead Jerry Siegel to sue them, and they get kind of a settlement agreement to kind of get them away from Superman, right? This is kind of whereas the courts don't really work in the Superman creator's favor, right? Because they do get some money, but it's kind of saying, like, really letting you know that they do not they have no stake in the ownership of Superman, which is kind of why they were also suing, to not just take on Kid Superboy, which they couldn't obviously publish the Superboy comic book. So, and then they also, a lot of people try to point out that they made another comic that didn't fail, but Jerry Siegel had a bunch of other things like the Spectre, like stuff that he created that weren't big hits, but this part of creation, right? So at this point, they're kind of, after the suit, they're pushed out of DC, right? They're pushed out of DC, right? Because they sued. But then I think it's it was Jerry Siegel's wife, Joanne. She comes to DC and she basically fights for him to get his job back. Like, she comes in there and she said, "Do you want me to tell everyone that, the creator of Superman is going to starve to death?" And from that embarrassment, right? So you can say, you can say they don't deserve this. DC is constantly embarrassed by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Joe Shuster was also was a messenger in the city, which is kind of the entry level type job. And when DC would see him walking the thing and people would recognize him, they would curse him out and toss him some money, and then like tell him to get out, don't come back. But at times he had to drop things off at DC, and this would routinely happen, right? And I think at some point Schuster went from buying a house for his family to living in a family member's house. So it's, they were on hard times, right? So Jerry Siegel's wife, complains to DC, in fear of embarrassment, or national in fear of embarrassment, take back Jerry Siegel. And he writes a lot of classic Superman stories, and they talk about basically he didn't create the Legion, but he became one of the mainstay writers outside of sometimes when Edmund Hamilton came back, or I think what did I say? I think Otto Binder too. But and then the gray area is why he was ousted, and most of the time saying he kind of fell from favor as shifting writers and this, that, and the other, fighting off Marvel, that sort of thing, of saying we had these younger writers coming in. And in here, they talk about what is known as the return of copyright, right? At that point, they said you had 28 years for any creation. That's something that came outside of a publishing house, outside of a company, something like that, something that was brought to a company, then the creator had the right to ask for the creation back. Now, in history, anyone that's been kind of a big corporation has been able to push back on this. But ultimately, it is what it is. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster had created the Reign of Superman. They had this thing that was a strip that they had went to many companies, which would make this fall under the return of copyright thing. And they brought it to DC, something not done in their studio. And DC would put this story that was existing already. They cut up the newspaper strip and made it into a comic book, right? Because they were trying to sell it as a newspaper strip. And so this would, but for some reason, from 1966, when it came up in the question, they were in courts. They lost the initial case, but it was going all the way up to the Supreme Court by 1975, right? So even though they lost, people like Ponta, they lost the copyright thing, they still had a case because it was something created outside of DC, right? So those copyrights go back to the creator. This is what Joe Simon had done for Captain America. That's why he has something where it says the agreement. That's why now the Siegel family has asked for Superman back a number of times, because it falls under something created outside of a company. That's just what the law is. And the only thing is that you can fight against it is if you have a lot of money and you can push against patents, like the same way the creator of the TV had to fight against RKO, because RKO had made up false patents to sue the creator of the television, say, hey, we had this idea months before this guy. So with that said, in 1975, DC has appealed to him, right? They have appealed to Siegel. And Siegel responds saying, why did they drop the case finally in 1975? And he said, we were induced to drop our case and not to take it to Supreme Court, because National had indicated that if we would do that, they would decide whether or not they could do something for Joe and I. So we figured that after all we've been through, we might take a gamble and just trust the generosity and the good intentions of Nationals. Many years passed away, and we perhaps thought there was a higher level of thinking there, right? So Siegel basically said, hey, this is going close to the Supreme Court. DC kind of appealed to them, and they dropped the suit, right? But they could have gone further with it, right? The same way the Siegels have been going through it now in the present day, and gaining a lot of ground. So, but then, and we get back to the curse of the Superman, curse in the Superman movie. In the months of them dropping the suit, nothing happened. DC didn't do anything for them, basically abandoned them, right? They didn't even tell them they decided against it. They just abandoned them. And then when they heard the movie, that's when Jerry Siegel says what he says, right? And he hits hard. And that's when we get all the stuff. We have, Neil Adams come in and, try to use that, but does the same thing that Jerry Siegel's wife at the time did, appeal to DC and Jeanette Kahn and other people and the Warner people, saying, hey, these are the creators of Superman, just give them something little and people will think you guys did the good job. And they got, I think $20,000 each as a pension, which wasn't bad then, and as years went on, they upped it, they probably still get something from them, but at the same time, they're now, Siegel family is now kind of putting, still fighting to get the character, because this is what the copyright law is. Copyright law is created outside of a company. You have the right to get it back. That someone cannot, carry a creation for X amount of years forever. And that has nothing to do with public domain. This has to do with, and this is why, if it was a situation they gave him back after 28 years, and just licensed the character to them, it would have been perfect. But anyway, with that said, the way it ends is After that point, after they figure this out, there's nothing bad said from what they did right by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Finally, he talks about DC and their time together, and he stays positive. But the negative energy that was forth is not just because he was just a dumb hick that wanted to make some money and felt that he was swindled, and basically he was a partner with DC. They were gaining some profits from all the other media that was going on at the time, and DC kind of pushed in, kind of with Jerry Siegel not being there, the more businessman of the operation, usurping their business, bringing it to DC, and then taking their ideas that they had, that DC rejected, then doing it themselves, and basically saying, well, we did this, that sort of thing. And that's when they get sued. They don't really lose, because the loss is that Jerry Siegel can't do a Superboy story outside. They do a character, funny man, that doesn't make it, right? And at the same time, even with Joe Shuster's eyesight, he could have still been the art director, right? He could have stayed the art director, because that's, and with the ghost artists, and had a part in this sort of thing because he was involved in creation. That just would have been the right thing. So I kind of went through a lot of stuff. I'm probably going to have to figure this thing out, but I did want to do this video to kind of say this idea that either they just kind of came in with this idea, one in a million shot, they lucked up, and then they signed a deal, then they wanted the deal reversed, right? When they were already participating, but because of the suit, then it's like, hey, you signed over this thing, we're cutting all this stuff off, right? So, and then if you say, hey, they did sign it away, the fact is that if DC can, if Siegel and Schuster can't, they signed it away for $130, then when the copyright comes up, and they say it's returned, the copyright should return to the creators, then the copyright has to go back. That's what the law is. It's what it is. You didn't sign it. They never signed away the copyright return thing, which was something that was created in I guess not when it was created, but it was something that Joe Simon called Burglos. Bill Everett was they just gave him money because they didn't want to deal with that. But it's one of those things where Jerry Siegel was playing ball. He was the Mort Wessinger of the period, right? He was involved in a lot of the things outside of just producing comic books. He was the face of Superman. He was going out there talking to people, and then at some point when he goes to war, doing the right thing, right? DC kind of takes it from him, and Whitney Ellsworth becomes the guy talking to the TV people, because Joe Shuster would have been the guy talking to the TV people. It's just what it would be. He would have been Mort Wessinger. He would have been that guy, right? But once they push him out, that's when I guess Whitney Ellsworth and Mort Wessinger, because Mort Wessinger also went to the war too, and that's how Jack Schliff, he gets into it. So it's one of those things that is sad to say, but I had to change my opinion on it, because I did feel that hey, you signed a deal, that's what it is. But they had more of a deal than just creating a character and then them producing, them are artist, writer, and then working for a DC editor. They were kind of, it was kind of like, how can I say this? Yeah, he's kind of, even though he's kind of a writer editor, he's kind of like Stan Lee, and you have a Martin Goodman, which is Ellsworth. You have the people who own that. You have the Martin Goodmans. Even though Martin Goodman had no one above him, you had Jack Libowitz, who wasn't actually an editor. They had managing editor. So you have these levels to it, right? So I guess, you got Shooter, you have Mike Hobson, who's above him, and you have the president that's above them. So yeah, so it's one of the things where I just wanted to say, because we've done so many videos talking about creators' rights, and Siegel and Schuster kind of come up in this thing a lot, but they can't be compared to Kirby, any of these people that were working in-house with a job within the company and doing something, whereas they were already participating in the success of Superman at some point once it really takes off. At some point they got he got told off by DC, and of course they were found that's even wrong now, saying that Superman wasn't that important and they weren't interested in it becoming bigger than any of their other characters that were in Action Comics. So that's mainly what I wanted to talk about, because hey, they had a deal that's not similar to Batman, but they had their own studio. They were putting books together. The books were being published. DC is their distributor. It wasn't like the Whitney Ellsworth is the one putting together the story, or Jack Schliff, the ones that are kind of putting the stories together. They kind of put some ghosts in there to kind of take it away. They're the ones that kind of took it away from them. So, yep. And fair is fair. DC owns it for 28 years. If that's fair, then the copyright law is fair of saying it needs to go back to the creators, right? Spinner Rack out.